The first sign is not betrayal. It is the weight. A pressure that settles into the ground long before the first shot is fired, long before anyone dares to say the thought aloud. You feel it in the tremble of stone beneath your feet, in the way shrine candles gutter without wind, in the distant thunder that does not match any storm pattern recorded on a data slate. Imperial Knights are moving where they should not move, and even before you understand what that means, your body does. Something ancient and absolute has shifted its balance, and the world beneath you has begun to choose sides. If stories like this matter to you, stories that linger where loyalty fractures and faith is tested under impossible weight, then stay with this one. Mark it, share it with those who still believe protection is unconditional, and remain here because what follows is not legend or propaganda. It is the lived consequence of what happens when the Imperium's walking gods turn inward. The first sign is not fire, treachery, or even fear. It is the weight. It arrives as a low, unsettling pressure that seeps upward through stone and steel, something you feel in your teeth before your mind gives it a name. The paving stones beneath the processional avenue tremble, just enough to rattle shrine votives and make the stained glass in the basilica sigh against its lead seams. No alarm sounds. No vox announcement breaks the morning rites. The ground simply moves, and for a moment everyone pretends it did not. On worlds like this, you are taught early that Imperial Knights walk the land like living mountains. Their steps are part of the planet's rhythm, as natural as tectonic shifts or seasonal storms. When they move, the earth responds. When they kneel in ceremony, the ground settles, as if relieved. You have grown up with that understanding folded into you, reinforced by parades, murals, catechisms, and the comforting certainty that those towering shapes on the horizon exist for one reason alone: to protect. So when the tremor passes and the candles stop flickering, you tell yourself it was nothing. The confessor continues his sermon without pause, his voice echoing through the nave as incense coils toward the vaulted ceiling. You bow your head with everyone else, lips moving through prayers you have spoken since childhood. Outside, the bells of the Manufacturum district toll the change of shift. Routine holds, because routine is sacred here. But the ground does not forget. A second tremor follows an hour later, stronger than the first. This time, a hairline crack splits the stone at the base of the basilica's steps, running like a fault line toward the street. A servitor stumbles as it drags a cart of devotional parchments, its augmetics compensating a heartbeat too late. Someone laughs nervously. Someone else mutters a prayer to the Omnissiah. Still, no alarms. You step outside into the open plaza, squinting against the pale light filtering through smog and cloud. From here, the horizon is broken by spires, habstacks, and far beyond them, the jagged silhouettes of night keeps rising from fortified ridgelines. Banners hang from those keeps, vast fields of color and sigil that mark ancient houses, whose names are woven into every local history. You know those colors. Everyone does. They are not supposed to be moving. At first, it is subtle, a shift in how the banners hang, pulled at an angle by wind that does not reach the city. Then the silhouettes themselves change, slow and deliberate, like giants adjusting their stance. You blink, certain your eyes are playing tricks on you. Knights conduct patrols, they reposition. This is not unprecedented, but they do not march toward the city. The vox grills embedded along the plaza walls crackle to life, filling the air with overlapping bursts of static and half-formed words. A municipal official begins to speak, his voice strained but controlled, urging calm and patience while routine maneuvers are conducted by the Night House. The message cuts off abruptly, replaced by a looping tone. No follow-up comes. Around you, people stop pretending. The crowd's mood shifts from mild curiosity to something tighter, more brittle. Conversations drop to whispers. Parents pull children closer. You hear someone say that the Knights are responding to an external threat, that perhaps Xenos forces have been sighted beyond the outer settlements. The idea is comforting. External threats make sense. They justify movement. They preserve the narrative. Another tremor rolls through the plaza, strong enough this time to send a chunk of stone shearing from a gargoyle's wing. It shatters at your feet, dust blooming into the air. The sound is sharp, final. There is no laughing now. Somewhere in the city, an alarm finally sounds, low and mournful, its pitch reserved for disasters no one likes to name. It is quickly joined by others, cascading across districts in a discordant wave. The sky seems to press down in response, heavy with ash, and the distant hum of void shields cycling to higher readiness. You taste metal at the back of your tongue. Imperial Knights are visible now without doubt, their immense forms cresting the ridgelines in full view. Sunlight glints off adamantium plates etched with heraldry that has not changed in centuries. Each step they take sends a visible shudder through the terrain, dust pluming at their feet. They advance with the calm precision of something that doesn't expect resistance. Why would they? These machines have walked through wars that annihilated civilizations. They have stood against orc hordes, against necron phalanxes, against horrors dragged screaming from the warp. The city beneath them is not an enemy. It is a possession, a responsibility. That is why the thought feels so wrong when it surfaces, unbidden and unwelcome. They are not stopping. Vox traffic surges again, this time spilling into the open channels used by civilians. You hear fragments of military chatter, clipped and urgent. Astra Militarum units are being redeployed toward the inner districts, their commanders demanding clarification that does not come. Someone invokes ancient compacts, oaths sworn between house and world, their voice rising with disbelief. Another voice cuts in, flat and cold, ordering all non-essential personnel to shelter immediately. The word non-essential echoes in your mind as you move with the crowd, funneling into transit tunnels and underpasses. You have never considered whether you are essential before. The Imperium has never asked. The tunnels smell of damp stone and old oil. Emergency lumen strips flicker to life as people press inward, bodies packed too tightly for comfort. Somewhere, a child is crying. Somewhere else, someone is praying loudly enough to be heard over the rising din. Then the first shot is fired. You do not see it. You feel it. A concussive wave slams through the tunnels, throwing you off your feet and extinguishing half the lumen strips in an instant. The air is driven from your lungs in a violent rush, replaced by dust and the acrid bite of ozone. Screams follow, sharp and panicked. The Knights have opened fire. Above ground, a lance of energy tears through a hab block near the outer districts, vaporizing the upper levels in a bloom of white-hot light. The sound arrives a moment later, a deafening crack that rattles teeth and collapses weaker structures outright. The tunnel ceiling sheds debris, and for a terrifying second you are certain it will come down entirely. It does not. Not yet. Panic spreads now, uncontrolled and contagious. People surge deeper into the tunnels, trampling those who fall. You are dragged along, your shoulder slammed against concrete, your ears ringing. Training drills and evacuation plans dissolve under the weight of instinct. Survival has replaced order. You hear someone shouting that the Knights must be compromised, that this cannot be deliberate. Another voice answers with a bitter laugh, asking what difference that makes to those burning above. More impacts follow in rapid succession. The knights are not firing indiscriminately. That, somehow, makes it worse. Their strikes are precise, surgical, targeting infrastructure nodes, command centers, and transit hubs with terrifying efficiency. Power grids fail in cascading blackouts. Vox towers collapse into fire and twisted metal. This is not rage. This is a campaign. Hours pass in fragments. You move when pushed, stop when the crush becomes too dense, wait in darkness broken only by distant thunder. Somewhere along the way, you lose track of companions whose names you never learned. You do not know if they fell or if they were carried in a different direction by the tide of bodies. When you finally emerge into open air again, it is into a city you barely recognize. Smoke chokes the streets, turning daylight into a bruised twilight. Fires burn unchecked, their heat warping metal and blistering stone. The grand processional avenue is a ruin of craters and shattered statuary. The basilica's spire lies broken across a plaza, its bells warped and silent, and there, framed by flame and smoke, stands a knight. Up close, it is beyond comprehension. Its legs are thicker than hab blocks, pistons hissing as it shifts its weight. Its armor is scorched but intact, sigils still visible beneath layers of ash. The cockpit, high above, glows faintly, a single baleful eye scanning the devastation below. It does not look at you. You realize then how small you are, not just in scale, but in relevance. The night is not here for individuals. It is executing a decision made far above your existence, guided by oaths and convictions you will never be privy to. Astra Militarum tanks roll into view at the far end of the street, their crews scrambling into firing positions. They look absurdly fragile by comparison, their cannons raised in defiance that borders on tragedy. For a heartbeat, nothing happens. Then the night turns, its weapon discharges, and the tanks cease to exist in any meaningful sense. You do not stay to watch the aftermath. You run, lungs burning, legs screaming in protest. Around you, others do the same, fleeing through alleys and shattered buildings, chased by the sounds of destruction that never seem to grow distant. Somewhere in the chaos, a thought crystallizes with terrible clarity. The knights are not mistaken. They have chosen. As night falls, the city burns in earnest. Emergency broadcasts resume briefly, urging evacuation toward designated zones, though no one can confirm which zones remain intact. The messages repeat, then stutter, then fade into static once more. Above, the sky glows with reflected fire, clouds lit from beneath like a funeral pyre. You find shelter in the shell of a manufactorum, crouched among broken machinery and spent shell casings. Around you, survivors huddle in silence, eyes wide and hollow. No one speaks of why this is happening anymore. That question feels irrelevant. What matters is that the ground has chosen sides, and you are standing on the wrong one. As the thunder of distant footsteps continues through the night, one certainty settles in your chest, heavier than fear, heavier than grief. The knights were never just protectors, they were power. And power, once it decides to turn, does not explain itself to those beneath its shadow. Before a knight ever takes a step in war, long before its weapons are armed or its reactors brought to full output, it kneels. You were taught this as a child. Every citizen was. The murals in the Scola halls showed it clearly, a towering god machine bowing its head before banners heavy with lineage, a single armored figure ascending the gantry toward the throne mechanicum. The lesson was simple and repeated often. Knights do not rule. They serve. Their power is bound by oath, tempered by tradition, and guided by duty to the Imperium and the world that sustains them. That belief does not shatter easily. Even now, as the city burns, part of you clings to it, because the alternative is too vast to confront, To believe that Imperial Knights have turned willingly is to accept that something sacred has failed, not through corruption or madness, but through choice. Inside the night keeps, far from the screaming streets, a very different reality unfolds. The keeps are ancient structures, older than the city itself, their foundations sunk deep into bedrock, reinforced with layers of ceramite and faith. Within them, the sacristies hum with restrained power. Servitors glide along recessed tracks, their augmetics whispering binharic cant as they tend to the god machines. Incense hangs thick in the air, infused with sacred oils and machine spirits' appeasement rites. Here, the tremors are constant, not from fear, but from readiness. Night pilots move through the halls with measured steps, their armor half-donned, their expressions unreadable. These are not common soldiers. They are scions of bloodlines that trace back centuries, each name carrying the weight of worlds defended and enemies crushed. From birth, they were taught that they are stewards of power others cannot wield responsibly. That lesson matters now. In the central strategium, house banners hang unmoving despite the vibration of active reactors. The High Scion stands beneath them, one gauntleted hand resting on a lectern carved with sigils of lineage and conquest. His voice carries across the chamber, calm and deliberate, as he addresses the assembled pilots. He does not speak of rebellion. He speaks of duty. He recounts the ancient compacts between House and Imperium, emphasizing clauses long glossed over in public recitation. Words about mutual obligation, about the right of a house to defend its honor and autonomy when imperial authority overreaches. These are not fabrications. They are real, buried in centuries of legal scripture few outside the houses ever read. The pilots listen in silence. Each of them feels the throne mechanicum's presence even now, a low psychic pressure at the edge of awareness. It is a device older than most worlds, a fusion of archaeotech and ritual that binds pilot to machine. It amplifies emotion, conviction, and will, feeding them back until thought and steel blur. Doubt does not thrive in that environment. One by one, the pilots are called forward to reaffirm their oaths, not the public versions recited during ceremonies, but the deeper ones, sworn within the sacristy vaults where no outsider has ever stood. Oaths to the house first, to lineage, to the legacy that defines them more strongly than any imperial edict. Some hesitate. The hesitation is brief, almost imperceptible, but it exists. These pilots have walked among the people. They have seen gratitude, fear, and worship. Turning their weapons inward is not an abstract concept. It is a choice that will stain them forever. The throne does not punish hesitation. It absorbs it. When a pilot steps into the throne mechanicum and the neural links engage, thought expands. Memories surface unbidden. Victories burn brighter. Slights sharpen. Grievances long dismissed as minor irritations grow heavier under the machine's scrutiny. The Imperium's demands, the audits, the restrictions placed on house movements in recent decades all resurface with renewed clarity. The machine does not lie. It simply prioritizes. What the throne reinforces is not treachery, but certainty. The certainty that the house knows what is best, that its authority is ancient, earned, and increasingly constrained by distant bureaucrats who do not understand the burden of wielding god machines. Within that framework, turning against imperial subjects is reframed as tragic necessity rather than betrayal. The city is no longer a home. It is leverage, a demonstration of what happens when house autonomy is challenged. The High Scion never says this aloud. He does not need to. As the knights deploy, their movements are disciplined and restrained. They do not trample indiscriminately. They do not indulge in excess. Each strike is calculated to maximize impact while preserving future bargaining power. Power stations, command centers, vox hubs, symbols of imperial governance. The pilots feel the city's destruction through the throne's feedback, distant echoes of fear and pain bleeding through the machine's psychic field. Some flinch, some grit their teeth. None stop. The throne reinforces their resolve, feeding back their own justification until it becomes unassailable truth. To stop now would be to admit error, and error is anathema to a system built on inherited authority. Within the keeps, the sacristans chant continuously, their voices a steady undercurrent beneath the roar of reactors. They tell the machine spirits that this is necessary, that the house acts within its rights, that obedience to house supersedes obedience to distant lords who have forgotten the meaning of stewardship. Machine spirits do not question rhetoric, they respond to ritual. Outside, imperial responses begin to coalesce, and the knights feel it through Auspec's returns and battlefield data. Astra Militarum units mobilize, defensive lines form, resistance stiffens. This is expected. It validates the House's stance. Opposition proves that authority has indeed turned against them. Negotiation. Channels flicker briefly into existence, then are ignored. The High Scion has already decided that words have lost their utility. Among the pilots, a fracture begins to form. Not all oaths weigh equally. One knight, bearing older heraldry marked by repairs layered over centuries, slows its advance. Its pilot hesitates, the throne registering a spike of conflicting emotional feedback. Memories intrude unbidden, civilians cheering during past parades, children staring up in awe, hands raised in benediction. The knight's weapon does not fire when commanded. For a heartbeat, the battlefield holds its breath. Then another knight steps forward and fires instead, obliterating the target in a blast of incandescent fury. The message is clear, even without words. The advance continues. Within the keep, the High Scion receives the data and issues a quiet order. The hesitant knight is marked for containment, not destruction. Recovery. Its pilot will be dealt with later, away from the battlefield, where doubt can be excised without spectacle. Unity must be maintained. By the time Imperial counterfire begins to seriously threaten the knights, the internal logic of the house has fully crystallized. They are no longer reacting, they are asserting. Each loss is framed as martyrdom, each victory as proof of righteousness. The throne mechanicum amplifies this narrative relentlessly. Pilots who fall do so convinced of their cause, their final thoughts fed back into the machine network, reinforcing the resolve of those still fighting. Grief is transmuted into resolve. Loss becomes fuel. From the outside, it looks like madness. From within, it feels like clarity. The knights are not acting in chaos. They are acting in accordance with a worldview that places house sovereignty above imperial abstraction. A worldview nurtured over centuries, protected by privilege, and now armed with weapons capable of enforcing it. As the sun sets on the first full day of destruction, the knights withdraw slightly, repositioning to defensible ground. This, too, is deliberate. The High Scion knows the Imperium's patience is vast but finite. He intends to force a reckoning on his terms. In the sacristy, the chants never stop. Servitors replace damaged components. Sacristans anoint armor plates scorched by Imperial fire. The knights kneel briefly, not in submission, but in preparation. The throne mechanicum hums with restrained power, saturated with conviction. No one speaks of what will happen if the Imperium refuses to bend. That possibility has been excluded from consideration. Oaths, once sworn, are difficult to break. Oaths reinforced by steel, lineage, and machine are nearly impossible to question. As night deepens and the city continues to burn, the knights stand ready, god machines framed against a sky glowing with reflected fire. Within their cockpits, pilots steady their breathing, hands resting on control interfaces older than most worlds. They believe utterly that they are right. And that belief, more than any weapon they wield, is what will doom them when the Imperium finally decides that autonomy has gone too far. Because the Imperium does not fear power, it understands. It fears power that believes itself justified. The first Imperial response does not look like salvation. It looks like hesitation. For hours after the Knights begin their advance in earnest, the sky remains empty save for smoke and drifting ash. No triumphant arrival of void ships, no immediate rain of fire to scour the god machines from the ground. For those trapped beneath burning spires and collapsing hab blocks, that absence feels like abandonment. The Imperium knows. It must know. And yet it waits. You learn later that this is not indecision. It is a calculation. On the ground, Astra Militarum units move with grim determination, forming firing lines in streets never meant to hold armor. Lehman Russ tanks grind over rubble, their engines howling as crews struggle to maintain formation amid debris and panicked civilians. Infantry dig in where they can, taking cover behind shattered statuary and overturned transports, weapons trained upward at enemies too large to truly comprehend. From your vantage point inside a collapsed manufactorum annex, you watch them prepare. The soldiers' faces are smeared with soot and exhaustion, their eyes fixed on the horizon where the knights advance. These men and women are veterans. You can tell by the way they move, by the economy of their gestures. They have fought orcs, traitors, worse things still. None of that experience prepares them for this. The knights emerge through the smoke like walking fortresses, their silhouettes vast and unmistakable. Each step they take sends tremors through the ground, knocking loose more debris and widening cracks in already shattered streets. Their weapons track targets methodically, servo motors whining as they adjust aim. The first volley from the Astra Militarum is disciplined and futile. Battle cannons thunder in unison, their shells streaking toward the knights in arcs of smoke and flame. Explosions blossom against adamantium armor, bright and violent, but when the smoke clears, the knights are still there, scorched, scarred, advancing. The return fire is annihilating. A single thermal blast scythes through a tank column, turning armored vehicles into molten wreckage in seconds. Infantry positions vanish in white-hot flashes, the sound arriving too late to warn anyone. You feel the heat even at this distance, a searing wave that steals breath and ignites whatever it touches. The soldiers do not break immediately. They keep firing. You realize then that courage, at this scale, is almost indistinguishable from despair. They know they cannot win. They fight anyway because retreat would leave the city entirely undefended, and because obedience has been carved into them as deeply as fear. Above, the sky begins to change. At first, it is a subtle shift in the cloud cover, a thinning that reveals patches of dull gray beyond the smoke. Then contrails cut through the haze, sharp and purposeful. Thunderhawks descend in tight formation, their hulls marked with the Imperial Aquila, their engines screaming defiance. Cheers erupt. From somewhere nearby, raw and desperate. The knights react instantly, their auspex arrays light up with new targets, their weapons swiveling skyward. The first Thunderhawk takes a direct hit mid-descent, its shields flaring briefly before collapsing. It spirals downward in a trail of fire, smashing into a hab stack and collapsing it in a roar of destruction. The others scatter, deploying troops as they maneuver. Adeptus Astartes make planetfall amid the chaos, their drop pods slamming into streets already torn apart. Space Marines emerge into fire and rubble, bolters barking as they advance with brutal efficiency. Their presence shifts the battle's tone immediately. Where the Guard fights to hold, the Astartes fight to kill. Still, even they are small against the Knights. You watch one squad advance across an open plaza, their movements precise, their coordination flawless. They fire crack missiles in carefully timed volleys, striking joint assemblies and sensor clusters. One Knight stumbles, its leg servos grinding as it struggles to regain balance. For a heartbeat, hope flickers. Then the Knight recovers. Its weapon discharges point blank, and the plaza becomes a crater. When the dust clears, nothing remains of the squad but scorched ceramite fragments and drifting ash. The Knight steps over the impact site without pause. That is when the sky finally answers in full. Void ships break through the cloud layer, their immense forms blotting out what little light remains. They hang in low orbit, weapons arrays glowing as they charge. The air itself seems to vibrate with restrained power, a deep, omnipresent hum that sets your teeth on edge. Orbital fire lances downward. The first strike obliterates an entire district on the city's edge, a controlled demonstration of force rather than a direct attack on the Knights. Buildings vanish in a column of incandescent energy, the shockwave flattening structures kilometers away. You are thrown to the ground, ears ringing, vision blurred by dust and pain. The message is unmistakable. This is what the Imperium can do if it chooses to escalate. The Knights pause. For the first time since the assault began, they hesitate visibly. Their advance slows, their formation tightening as if the machines themselves sense the shift in stakes. Within their cockpits, pilots receive data feeds that paint a grim picture. The Imperium has arrived in earnest, and it is no longer probing. It is threatening annihilation. Negotiation channels open again, briefly. Demands are issued, ultimatums framed in precise, legalistic language. The Knights do not respond. The High Scion understands that to answer now would be to accept imperial framing, to concede that this is a rebellion rather than an assertion of rights. He orders the advance to continue. The Imperium responds without further warning. This time, orbital fire targets the Knights directly. Precision strikes slam into the ground around them, cutting off avenues of retreat and collapsing terrain beneath their feet. One Knight loses footing entirely, crashing into a ravine opened by sustained bombardment. Its reactor breaches moments later, the explosion sending a plume of fire and debris high into the air. You feel it like a blow to the chest. The ground war intensifies beyond comprehension. Astra Militarum units surge forward under cover of orbital strikes, their casualties mounting but their resolve hardening. Titans are rumored to be inbound, though none appear yet. The battlefield becomes a layered hellscape of overlapping engagements, each more lethal than the last. Civilians caught in the open are simply erased. You see it happen more than once. A crowd fleeing down a side street, only to be caught between advancing Knights and Imperial fire. There is no time to react, no shelter to reach. One moment they are there, the next the street is empty save for scorched pavement and drifting smoke. You stop counting after a while. There is no meaning in numbers anymore. As night deepens, the city glows with unnatural light, fires reflecting off low clouds and turning the sky into a churning sea of red and orange. The noise never stops. Even when weapons fall silent for brief stretches, the hum of void ship engines and the crackle of burning infrastructure fill the void. Sleep becomes impossible. You move when you must, hide when you can, guided by instinct rather than plan. Around you, other survivors do the same, exchanging glances heavy with shared understanding. No one speaks unless necessary. Words feel fragile here, easily swallowed by the noise. At some point you realize that the Knights are losing, not because they lack power, but because the Imperium has more of it, and is willing to use it without restraint. Each knight that falls is met not with triumph, but with escalation. The message is clear. Resistance will be answered with overwhelming force until nothing remains. One by one, the god machines are driven back toward the outskirts, their numbers dwindling under sustained bombardment. Their strikes become more desperate, less controlled. Precision gives way to fury as pilots realize the window for leverage has closed. The Throne Mechanicum amplifies that realization into something like rage. The final stand comes near dawn. The remaining knights cluster around their keep, a fortress already battered by orbital fire. Imperial forces encircle the area, ground units holding position while void ships adjust firing solutions. There is a strange calm in the air, a sense that something irrevocable is about to happen. You watch from a distance, sheltered behind a collapsed transit station. The knights charge. They break from cover in a coordinated advance, weapons blazing, engines roaring defiance into the smoke-choked sky. For a moment, it is almost beautiful, a last assertion of power and identity against impossible odds. The Imperium answers with everything. Orbital strikes hammer the battlefield in rapid succession, overlapping explosions tearing the ground apart. Specialized anti-Titan weaponry comes online, beams of energy and kinetic force slamming into knight armor with devastating effect. One by one, the god machines fall, their deaths marked by reactor flares that turn night into day. The last knight stands alone for several heartbeats, its armor blackened and cracked, its movements sluggish. It raises its weapon one final time, aiming not at Imperial forces, but at the city beyond, as if in accusation. It never fires. A lance of energy spears down from orbit, punching through the knight's torso and detonating its reactor in a blinding flash. When your vision clears, there is nothing left standing where it was, only a smoking crater and falling ash. The silence that follows is absolute. No cheers rise from Imperial lines, no victory horns sound. The void ships hold position, weapons cooling, as ground forces advance cautiously into the ruins. The battle is over, but its weight lingers, heavy and oppressive. As dawn finally breaks, weak and gray through the smoke, you understand that whatever this world was before, it is gone. The sky answered back. And it did so with finality. What comes next will not be war, it will be judgment. The most frightening moment does not come during the battle, it comes after. When the last knight falls and the echoes of orbital fire fade into a distant, hollow rumble, the world waits for something to fill the void. A proclamation, a declaration of victory. An explanation that might give shape to the chaos and suffering left behind. Instead, there is only silence. The vox grills do not scream anymore. Across the city, channels that once overflowed with overlapping orders, prayers, and panic fall quiet all at once. Not damaged, not destroyed, simply muted. Static hums faintly, then settles into nothing at all. The absence presses down harder than the bombardment ever did, because now you know the Imperium is watching, and it is deciding. Imperial forces continue to move, but with a different rhythm. The frantic urgency of battle is gone, replaced by methodical precision. Astra Militarum units establish hardened perimeters, sealing off entire districts with prefabricated barriers and automated gun emplacements. Patrols sweep the streets in disciplined formations, their visors opaque, their orders unspoken. You are ordered to remain where you are, not by voice, but by presence, by the weight of authority made manifest in armored silhouettes and calibrated restraint. No one needs to shout when compliance is assumed. Survivors are gathered in waves. Those who emerge from hiding are directed toward processing hubs erected in intact manufacturum shells and transit depots. There are no medical triage lines driven by urgency or compassion. Instead, there are stations, lines, data slate checkpoints where identities are logged, injuries noted, and survival assessed in purely logistical terms. You stand in line for hours, surrounded by strangers whose faces mirror your own hollow exhaustion. When it is your turn, an administratum clerk scans your biometrics without looking up. You answer questions automatically. Name, function, location during engagement. No one asks what you saw. No one asks what you lost. Above the city, void ships remain in low orbit, their massive hulls visible through thinning smoke. They do not depart. They do not advance. Their presence is constant and oppressive, a reminder that escalation remains an option, even now that resistance has ended. You overhear fragments of conversation between officers who believe themselves unobserved. The words are precise and bloodless. Containment protocols, precedent risk, narrative stabilization. There is no anger in their voices, no triumph, only focus. Somewhere beyond the ruins, far from civilian reach, higher authority convenes. You will never see this gathering, but you feel its consequences ripple outward through every decision made on the ground. Adeptus Administratum officials collate casualty projections. Mechanicus envoys review night wreckage data streams, already dissecting failure points and deviations in machine spirit behavior. A single truth governs the room. This cannot be allowed to inspire imitation. The Knights are not discussed as traitors. They are discussed as a failure state, an anomaly, and anomalies in the Imperium are not corrected. They are erased. Days pass without announcement. The silence stretches, fraying nerves already worn thin. Rumors spread in its place, whispered cautiously between survivors huddled in temporary shelters. Some claim an inquisitor is inbound, summoned by the unprecedented scale of the event. Others insist the Adeptus Mechanicus will claim the entire world as compromised, subjecting it to decades of scrutiny and restriction. No one knows which rumor is true. That uncertainty is intentional. The remaining wreckage of the Knights is cordoned off under heavy guard. You glimpse Mechanicus teams at work from a distance, their red robes stark against the gray ruin. They chant as they work, their voices filtered through vox emitters, stripping meaning from sound. Great sections of adamantium armor are cut free and loaded onto transports. Data cores are removed with reverent care. Nothing of the Knights will remain here, not their bodies, not their legacy. At night, the city is darker than it has ever been. Power is restored only to essential zones, leaving vast stretches of ruin cloaked in shadow. Fires still burn where suppression efforts have not reached, their glow painting broken skylines in flickering orange. The air smells of ash and melted stone. You lie awake, listening to distant engines and the occasional thunder of controlled demolitions as unstable structures are brought down deliberately. Each collapse feels symbolic, as if the city is being reshaped not just physically, but conceptually. Imperial authority does not rush. It consolidates. Evacuation orders are issued selectively, targeting districts deemed unsalvageable. Entire populations are relocated with minimal explanation, herded into transports bound for destinations undisclosed. You watch families separated by clerical error, their protests ignored not out of cruelty, but efficiency. The Imperium does not see individuals, it sees assets. You are relocated yourself after 3 days, assigned to a fortified zone on the city's outskirts. Here, life resumes in a stripped-down approximation of normalcy. Work assignments are issued, rations distributed, curfews enforced. Everything is provisional, subject to revision. You ask an officer what will happen to the night house. He does not answer directly. "That matter is under review," he says, his tone final. You understand then that review does not imply uncertainty. It implies procedure. The decision, when it comes, is delivered without ceremony. One morning, the Vox grills crackle back to life across the city, broadcasting a single, carefully worded statement. The recent events are described as a localized insurrection caused by internal compromise within a night house. Imperial forces acted decisively to restore order. Civilian losses are acknowledged in abstract terms. There is no mention of betrayal, no mention of oaths broken. The Knights are referred to only as compromised assets. The broadcast ends without flourish. Life is expected to continue. House heraldry is removed from public spaces within days. Banners are taken down, statues dismantled. Shrines once dedicated to knightly protection are rededicated to broader imperial virtues: endurance, obedience, sacrifice. History is edited quietly and efficiently. Within weeks, it is as if the house never existed. You attend one such rededication ceremony, standing among hundreds of others beneath a hastily consecrated arch. The confessor speaks of unity, of the emperor's eternal vigilance, of the dangers of pride. His words wash over you without impact. You know what is missing. The silence that follows the ceremony feels heavier than any sermon. Authority has finished speaking. What remains is compliance. The city, or what is left of it, settles into a new equilibrium. Trade routes reopen cautiously. Manufacturum lines restart with reduced capacity. New hab blocks rise where old ones fell, their architecture functional and austere, stripped of ornament. There is no effort to rebuild what was lost, only to replace it. At night, when the world is quiet enough for thought to intrude, you replay moments from the battle in fragmented flashes. The sound of footsteps like thunder, the glare of orbital fire, the impossible scale of destruction unleashed by both sides. You realize then what the silence was truly for. It was never confusion. It was containment. The Imperium allowed the noise to fade so that the lesson could settle in without distraction, so that no competing narrative could take root, so that when authority finally spoke, there would be nothing left to argue with it. The Knights challenged imperial primacy openly. Authority responded by ensuring that no trace of that challenge could survive intact. As days turn into weeks, you begin to understand the deeper horror of what happened here. Not the violence, not even the betrayal, but the efficiency. The Imperium did not rage, it did not panic. It observed, calculated, and acted in a way that left no ambiguity about the cost of deviation. And as the last official reports are filed and sealed, as the world is quietly folded back into the Imperium's vast ledger of compliant systems, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Once authority speaks, nothing it addresses is allowed to speak back. Not in protest, not in memory, not even in silence. The world doesn't end when the last night falls. That is the final cruelty of it. Dawn still comes, thin and colorless, filtering through layers of smoke that never fully clear. The manufacturum sirens resume their scheduled cycles. Ration dispensers hum back to life. The Imperium does not pause for mourning, because mourning implies something has gone wrong. What happened here has already been processed, categorized, and resolved. Life continues because it must. You are released from provisional housing with a new work designation stamped onto a data slate you did not ask for. Your former duties are marked unavailable, the facilities that required them now listed as permanently decommissioned. No explanation accompanies the change. Explanation would suggest that you are owed one. The streets you walk each day feel narrower, even where debris has been cleared. Not physically, but psychologically. Every intersection carries memory. Every stretch of repaired pavement covers something scorched and broken beneath. You know better than to linger. Surveillance servitors drift overhead with quiet vigilance, their lenses tracking movement patterns rather than faces. This world is being taught how to behave again. The night keeps on the horizon are gone. Where once their silhouettes dominated the skyline, there are now only empty ridgelines and the scars of orbital strikes cut deep into the rock. The keeps were dismantled with methodical precision, their foundations cracked and collapsed to ensure nothing remains usable. What could be salvaged was removed under heavy Mechanicus guard. What could not was destroyed. The land itself has been declared ritually unsafe. You hear that phrase repeated in official notices, always without elaboration. Unsafe does not mean dangerous. It means inconvenient to remember. The absence is more unsettling than the destruction ever was. For generations, the Knights were a constant, their presence woven into everything from seasonal festivals to emergency protocols. Without them, the world feels unbalanced, like a structure that has lost a load-bearing pillar and not yet realized it. No replacement is announced. The Imperium does not rush to fill symbolic voids. Instead, it adjusts expectations. Schola curricula are revised. Children are taught a simplified version of recent history, in which the Knights appear briefly, abstractly, as an example of compromised authority swiftly corrected. Their individual deeds are omitted. Their house name is never spoken aloud. You hear a child ask once why the old murals were painted over. The teacher tells them that tastes change. Faith follows suit. Shrines once dedicated to knightly guardianship are rededicated to broader imperial virtues, their iconography stripped of house heraldry and replaced with the imperial aquila in its most severe form. Confessors preach sermons focused on obedience, humility, and the dangers of pride masquerading as duty. No one mentions autonomy anymore. When you attend services, you notice how carefully words are chosen. Betrayal is never named directly. It is framed as error, as malfunction, as deviation from ordained purpose. The implication is clear. Systems fail. Individuals fail. The Imperium endures. That endurance is presented as mercy. Among the survivors, conversation changes. People still talk, but only about what is safe. Reconstruction schedules, ration quality, assigned labor shifts. You notice how stories now end early, how details are smoothed over before they can harden into something dangerous. Shared experiences are reduced to generalities. Everyone remembers. No one preserves. At night, when the city quiets enough for thought to surface, you find yourself replaying fragments you cannot fully integrate. The thunder of night footsteps, the moment orbital fire turned night into false dawn. The silence that followed, heavy and deliberate. You try to reconcile these memories with the official narrative. They do not fit. The Imperium does not demand that you believe its version of events. That would require effort. Instead, it ensures that believing anything else serves no purpose. There are no consequences for remembering privately, only for acting on it. You learn that several thousand citizens have been reassigned off-world in the weeks following the pacification. Labor shortages elsewhere are cited as justification. Their names disappear from local records, flagged as administratively transferred. You never see them again. You understand that this is not punishment. It is risk mitigation. Somewhere beyond this world, perhaps already en route to another conflict, the void ships that delivered judgment move on. Their departure is not announced. One day you simply realize the sky feels emptier. The relief you expect does not come. Instead, a quieter dread takes its place. Without the visible threat overhead, responsibility returns to the ground, and with it, the expectation that life should resume its previous cadence. You are expected to adapt. You do. Everyone does. Markets reopen in partially rebuilt districts. Vendors sell salvaged goods alongside new stock shipped in from compliant worlds. The economy stabilizes at reduced capacity, efficient and stripped of excess. What cannot be justified is not restored. Memorialization is minimal. A single monument is erected in a reclaimed plaza, its design intentionally abstract. No names are inscribed, no dates specified. It commemorates those lost during the pacification, a phrase broad enough to encompass any future reinterpretation. You pass it often on your way to work. At first you stop and stare. Later, you walk by without slowing. This is not indifference. It is conditioning. The Imperium understands that repetition dulls even the sharpest grief. Children play near the monument, chasing one another around its base. They do not know what it signifies. For them, it has always been there. It is simply part of the landscape. That realization hurts more than you expect. You begin to notice subtle shifts in enforcement. Patrols are omnipresent but rarely confrontational. Compliance checks are frequent but polite. Authority presents itself as stable, reasonable, inevitable. The message is not fear, it is certainty. Rumors still circulate, though they are quieter now, stripped of urgency. You hear whispers of other knight houses subjected to increased oversight, of ancient compacts quietly revised or reinterpreted, of sacristies audited by mechanicus envoys whose loyalty lies not with houses, but with data. No one speaks of rebellion. The word feels archaic. What happened here is framed as unrepeatable. A unique convergence of circumstances resolved through decisive action. The implication is that safeguards are now in place. You wonder if that is true. In unguarded moments, you consider the knights themselves, not as traitors or martyrs, but as something more unsettling. As proof that power granted conditionally will eventually test its boundaries. That oaths reinforced by tradition and privilege can drift from their original purpose without anyone noticing. That thought never fully forms. You have learned to interrupt it before it becomes dangerous. Weeks turn into months. The world stabilizes into something functional, if diminished. Trade resumes. New administrative leadership is installed, its members efficient and uncharismatic. Their authority is derived not from heritage, but from proximity to the Imperium's core. The change is intentional. Heritage invites comparison. One evening, as you walk home through a district still bearing scorch marks that will never quite fade, you hear distant thunder. For a heartbeat, your body reacts before your mind does, muscles tensing in anticipation of destruction. Then you realize it is only a storm. Rain begins to fall, light at first, then heavier, washing ash from the air and streaking soot down the sides of buildings. You stand there longer than necessary, letting it soak through your clothing. It feels like cleansing. It is not. The past does not wash away so easily. You think of the knights one last time, not as they were portrayed in murals or sermons, but as they truly were in those final hours. Massive, certain, convinced of their rightness. You understand now that what doomed them was not their firepower, nor even their defiance. It was their belief that authority could be negotiated from a position of strength. The Imperium does not negotiate with symbols of alternative legitimacy. It erases them. That lesson is the true legacy left behind on this world, not written in any official record, but carried quietly by those who lived through it. a shared understanding that loyalty is not a dialogue and that protection is never unconditional. You do not share this insight with anyone. There is no benefit in doing so. The Imperium endures, as it always has, absorbing catastrophe into its endless body and moving on. From its perspective, this world is stabilized, its anomaly resolved, its ledger balanced. From yours, something fundamental has shifted. You will never look at towering symbols of power the same way again. Never assume that guardians cannot become arbiters, or that ancient oaths cannot be reinterpreted when circumstances demand it. Somewhere, on another world, another night house stands vigilant, its banners immaculate, its pilots convinced of their righteousness. Another oath is sworn, reinforced by steel and ceremony. Another certainty takes root. And you understand, with quiet clarity, that the Imperium is not built on trust. It is built on control. When that control is challenged, it does not argue or persuade or forgive. It waits. Then it answers with silence, force, and revision, until nothing remains of the challenge but memory too diffuse to threaten stability. You carry that knowledge forward as you rebuild your life within the boundaries set for you. It does not make you rebellious. It does not make you brave. It makes you careful. Because you were there when the throne broke, when gods of war turned inward and were unmade for it. You saw how quickly reverence became liability, how swiftly authority closed ranks around itself. You understand now that in the grim darkness of the far future, survival is not about choosing the right side. It is about understanding that there is only one side allowed to endure. And when it speaks, even silence must obey.